Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo. Welcome to Sui Generis. I want to make a political discussion in light of busoga's political question as far as what is happening today is concerned. And I will make my arguments in light of substantive data that is easily acquirable in terms of the many information institutes that we have in this country. But the question perhaps is, why is busoga now a high risk in terms of high value political theater? Listen, busoga is no longer a passive NRM stronghold. Stereotyped, it has actually transformed into a swing region driven by structural poverty and youth unemployment and even the volatility of the sugarcane economy. And so I'm going to argue in terms of what they call the demographic and political weight. Busoga, for example, when by Busoga I'm talking about Jinja plus 11 other districts that remain nearly about 10% of the Uganda's population and contribute to a similar share in terms of the national electorate. When you argue in terms of statistics, you realize that National Household Survey argue that Busoga is one of the poorest sub-regions in terms of the poverty headcount. And this paints a bleak picture in terms of the accountability, in terms of the worsening vulnerability as far as poverty is concerned. And so we're talking about 16.1 rural poverty compared to 10.3 urban poverty. So these are challenges, and Busoga cannot ignore those. If we had to argue in terms of the political aspect, Busoga is numerically heavy and symbolically decisive. And so when you look at it also in terms of economic factors, then you have to understand that Busoga leaves its economic crisis in terms of many unresolved inherent governance issues. And therefore this becomes a bomb in terms of a question that is about to decipher in terms of the politics of Busoga. If you argue in terms of baseline, then you will understand that the election that broke the myth in terms of the 2021 political dispensation left so many questions for Busoga. Noop, for example, argued about 437,000 votes, and then Museveni probably got about 862 votes. So these are official tallies, and they have substantive questions to decipher. They show that Busoga is a serious battlefield in terms of those two political parties, if you like, in terms of district level patterns, in terms of who won, and in terms of the districts that actually played into what. Museveni won clearly in areas of Buyende, for example, in areas of Kaliro, in areas of Namutumba, and the likes. So it tells you what is the political cake now. Chagulani, on the other hand, won in areas of Kamuli, in terms of Luka, in terms of Iganga, in terms of Jinja, in terms of Bujiri, in terms of Bugweri, in terms of Mayuge, and even in terms of Namayingo. And that is something you cannot take away in terms of this debate. So when you're arguing in terms of structural political split, despite the losing of this presidential vote, NRM has actually retained the majority of MPs, LC5 chairpersons, and even local council positions. Noop, on the other hand, made major urban breakthroughs, especially in Jinja City, Iganga municipality, and even certain parts of Bujiri. Thus, Busoga emerged with what they call a dual personality. So the opposition leaning at presidential levels, and then NRM becoming dominant in terms of MP, but also in terms of district levels. Now, this is a political equilibrium. Both sides are actually trying to tilt in terms of their favor for 2026, and this is something I want to make in terms of the dispensation that we are arguing today. The current socio-economic nerve in terms of sugar, poverty, and PDM also play into the dynamics of Busoga. Sugarcane, for example, is now being used as a political a fault line. Busoga's economy is, sugarcane dependent in terms of serving mills like Kakira, Mayuge, and even others. Now, when you argue in terms of statistics, then you will understand that sugarcane prices, for example, fell from about 220,000 to 240 per ton. That was as far as 2018-29 to about 150 to 170 per ton. That was as far as 2023. Now we're talking about as low as 96,098. So Uganda's sugar production, basically in terms of rising, rose to about 785 1,000 per ton. Now, if you're talking about the percentage, we're talking about the 5% trash levy that was actually deducted by sugar process that had actually incurred. But we also mindful that in 2025, busoga farmers actually, in terms of Buyendo and Kaliro, have actually protested this 5% levy on the sugar in terms of that. Government has actually responded. When you look at 2025 in August, President Yoweri Museveni actually ordered millions to stop the 5% levy. He has also announced that the government actually plans to buy Mayuge Sugar Factory in terms of farmers to help them in terms of price control. Now, whether this is merely political or genuinely transformative remains a major 2026 war test, and that is something you have to understand again from the word go. Now, listen. When you're arguing also in terms of the busoga dynamics, then you may want to argue in terms of the poverty versus the PDM politics. Busoga remains one of those poorest regions, as I said, with about 140,000 residents living below the poverty line, according to UBOS in 2023-2024. So NRM is responsible for what? For the parish development model. But in January 2025, Museveni has actually spent so many days in Busoga on PDM monitoring tours. He has actually instructed leaders to focus on household income, not only to inroads but also other entities as well. So the NRM has actually done that in terms of engaging quite a number of people to make sure that this challenge is actually addressed. Now, Busoga's political question, therefore, in terms of the economics, is not ideological, and any camp desiring to make a substantive bite on the cake has to be very mindful of the youth, has to be very mindful of the fishing, has to be very mindful of the sugar industry as well. NRM in Busoga today, for example, has substantively quite heavy one steady feet in the sense that the pro NRM power architecture in terms of the Busoga household. Some NRMs have actually had political arteries, engaging them in terms of the Right Honorable Speaker, former Speaker Rebecca Kadaga, the Right Honorable Rukiana Kadama, the Right Honorable Millie Babalanda, and then the likes of Dr. Joseph Mvawala in terms of engaging and creating a soft landing for political dispensation for the people of Busoga. Even the cultural institution, the Chabazingaship itself, has actually had strong state house partnership in terms of this. So on paper, this looks like an unshakable dominancy. But then there are substantive internal factors that are likely to affect this so-called earthquake, if not even taken care of. Rather than in terms of engaging, we could see, for example, the likes of these individuals who have actually engaged many other stakeholders, like the current speaker, Anita Mong, in terms of the NRM reactionary approach in terms of engaging the people of Busoga. And this is fundamental in terms of driving the political dispensation of the people of Busoga. So this was actually perceived in terms of what has played out, who has played out, and the many sponsorship that has taken in terms of the different NRM cadres by way of MPship. And so this becomes a very fundamental factor in terms of the political dispensation of Busoga. We could also argue in terms of the primaries that took place. There was a tsunami of sorts. NRMs, Pan-NRMs, for example, saw several anti-Kadaga, loose flags in terms of evidence, in terms of internal structures. There were wars, they were unnecessary between the anti-NRM sentiments. We've also seen things like moral governance fatigue, for example, in terms of corruption, in terms of rumors, in terms of patronage within the political transactions that have actually ensued between the people of Busoga, especially within the NRM elites. We've also seen NRM strategic responses in terms of how the NRM has actually launched a three-pronged Busoga recovery plan. In terms of policy concessions, for example, it has also scrapped the 5% Ken levy that I just talked about. It has also promised the aspects of buying Mayuge Sugar Factory in terms of the purchase. It has also looked at in terms of the PDM acceleration, in terms of, for example, when you look at Igang and Luuka, Kamuli Road, prioritization in terms of the development. These are issues that NRM is actually trying to hold firm in terms of farming or asserting its presence there. They are symbolic in terms of messaging because we have also seen frequent presidential visits. The president has come east for some time. There has been strong association within the Chabazingaship, for example. There have been a lot of many Basogas now probably are handling as a narrative behind His Excellency in terms of solidifying or fortifying their support for the Busoga candidature. There's also been, in terms of rebalancing of sorts, they have been rewarding loyalists, for example, the likes of Honorable Balanda, and then sidelining perceiving rebels also, in terms of also tightening allegement with even state house strategies. So all these are political aspects that you can argue when you are trying to make a dispensation in terms of how Busoga is becoming a political theater of sorts. So if the economic benefits are not on the ground, then Busoga will interpret these as seasoned political bribes and not even transformation. Obviously, this is something that has to be understood even as these playouts are actually ensuing. If you look at NUP and the wider opposition in terms of strong emotions, in terms of uneven structure, we could also argue that NUP is actually have substantive strongholds. We look at the example, for example, when you look at what happened in 2021, presidential wins that happened in Busoga, NUP secured substantively a number of successes, yeah, in terms of especially its urban areas. We talk about the Ginger City, where Peter Kasolo actually ensured women MPs in the likes of Chibakutika, all those aspects in terms of municipality mayor, in terms of, Bamulensi, for example, all those aspects. The urban Busoga, in terms of Jinja, in terms of Iganga, in terms of Bujigorizo, is heavily youth-driven. And therefore, youth unemployment, which sits at about 17%, has a force, as an issue in terms of this. Youth labor, for example, underutilization is also another question. UBOS actually names it to about 48%. So you must understand that this demographic is actually emotionally repetitive to the Bobby Wine ethos of protest, and therefore that is something you must look into. Even in terms of internal shock, dropping of Busoga incumbents, for example. Talk about the late 2025 note that have dropped certain individuals like the likes of Kasolo, the likes of Chebakotika, the likes of Lulenzi. All these showcases in terms of the internal fights perhaps, but also in terms of repositioning of perhaps who may best serve their interests. So new flag bearers like Mubarak Chirunda were actually introduced. Kasolo responded by running independent, for example, and then this generates a lot of voter fragmentation, if you like, and there has been perceived elitism within NUP structures, and then there's aspect of organizational turbulency in terms of another dispensation. There's also been decline in terms of in terms of the ground morale. All this has played into the political dispensation of the people of Busoga. And then if you talk about other position currents, for example, talk about the FDC that actually weakened in structure, but personalities like Salam Musumba still hold significant local respect. And then we have independents that have actually increased in terms of especially on issues of sugarcane, land, and even youth unemployment. All these have played into this political dispensation of the people of Busoga, even as we know it today. So listen, you could also argue in terms of the kingdom structure, in terms of the church and what they call the software power or the soft power. Okay, we talk about the Chabazinga institution now enjoys stability and warm ties with the government in terms of what has happened today. But this doesn't go untailored. I've talked about things like cultural loyalty in terms of political loyalty. There has to be that blend. 2021 showed that Busoga can actually, love their king but vote against the ruling party simultaneously. That is something you cannot take away. And then we have also substantive charges in terms of how these churches shape the moral attitude of people in terms of mood, in terms of anti-corruption agenda, in terms of moral leadership messaging, in terms of youth behavior challenges. These influenced the atmosphere, not directly in terms of voting, but they have substantive effects in terms of the people of Busoga. So these also have to be taken into cognizance if you want to have a debate in terms of the political dispensation of this fine people called Busoga. In terms of the mapping, the battle zones that are likely to ensue in 2026 trajectories in terms of urban versus peri-urban Busoga, areas like Jinja City, Iganga Municipality, Bujiri Town, for example, those are emotionally pro-NUP because they are protesting in one way or the other. But structurally, instability has actually constituted in terms of the dual dependence of these independent rebellions. So NRM can actually win opposition disputes if this persists, and NUP retains advantage if organizational unity returns. Then you can talk about aspects in terms of the sugar belts, areas like Uluka, Buyende, Kaliro, for example, Namutumba, Mayuge, and hinterlands. Okay, the battleground for these sugarcane prices and other areas in terms of the farmers dignity also have to be played into currency. NRM regains ground if, for example, 5% levy is actually what used effectively. Opposition gains if these reforms become an issue. Okay, and then if you talk about lock shores or even islands, talk about Namingo, talk about the parts of Mayuge, for example, fishing licenses, and then other aspects to do with what boat confiscations, and then lake patrol brutality. All these play into busoga. Strong independence and local personality effect also has a political dispensation in terms of this argument. When you talk about traditional NRM strongholds, areas like Dipuro, Kamuri, Oiganga interior, Bujiri interior, and parts of Uyende, NRM's deepest network in terms of the effects of the Kadaga, Babalanda, Nakadama hold these particularly into sway. And some presidential leakages also in terms of top opposition are likely to ensue out of these political dispensation that are making the case for today. Now, listen. What actually moves busoga's political theory today, if you like? It has to be ensured on substantially about 5 clear aspects that you must take away. Number 1, busoga is genuinely contestable. Neither NRM nor NUP can actually calm this automatic dominancy. Number 2, in terms of economics is not an ideology. It's the king. Sugarcane prices, PDM money, youth jobs. They control the political climate in the people of Busoga. Number 3, in terms of political democracy, in terms of the matters, both NRM and NUP risk losing talent to independence if they don't be careful in terms of this. In terms of soft power actors that shape the narrative in terms of the votes, the kingdom and then the churches, these influence the tone but don't command ballots, but they have substantive effect. And then so if you talk about 2026, will be a mosaic in terms of not landslide aspects. We're going to talk about NRM dominancy in rural areas, and then NUP dominancy in these urban votes, and independence rising in some critical disruptors in terms of those political cake that we're talking about in terms of the dispensation of the political dynamics in Busoga. So these are some of the things that define what Busoga is today. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give some memorable takeaways in terms of the things that have to be taken serious when arguing the political dispensation of the people of Busoga. Busoga has moved from NRM backyard to Uganda's test laboratory for competitive multi-party politics. In Busoga, the sugarcane price is a ballot paper in disguise, and NRM has the offices, NUP has the emotions, but the real king makers are cane farmers, urban youth, and even bold independents. And this is substantially something you must comprehend from the word go. So these are some of the things you may want to argue. So if you want, you could have more leverage by reading some of the works that we do constantly at lubogo.org or suegeneslawup.com. Once again, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo. Find our works at lubogo.org and suegeneslawup.com. God bless you and thank you for your attention. Amen. Thank you.